Hi, my name is Ryan and I'm a Chartered Building Services Engineer. And I've had many years of experience putting together great energy strategies for new builds. And I'm going to lay out a process that I work with my clients, and it's a simple and easy process to follow to develop a great energy strategy. So why is it important to develop an energy strategy early on? Well, depending on what decisions you choose, what sort of heat sources you're going to take, if you're going to go for PVs or not, what other sort of technologies you're going to use, will have a knock-on effect on what sort of plant space you need and how the building is going to operate. So it's always good to start thinking about this early on. So the motivation for doing it, well, mainly it is to try and reduce running costs. Generally, the more money you invest early on in the build, the lower the running costs later on. And also, the more importantly, is CO2. Generally, if we could try and reduce as much energy consumption within the building, the less CO2 we are going to emit, and it will be overall better for the overall environment. So I'm going to quickly run through the process. So if that's something of interest to you, please watch on. Thank you. So before we get started, the first thing you need to think about is budget. What are you prepared to pay over and above what building regulations ask for? So firstly, I need to stress that building regulations is a bare minimum, and it shouldn't actually be considered a reasonable target. No new building should really be aimed at just meeting building regulations. So it's very important to get that also in your mind firstly. So once you've got a budget in mind, that will affect what sort of decisions you take later on in the process. But the first decision is adopting the fabric first principles. So generally, the more money you spend on your fabric, the less energy you're going to use in terms of your heating. So there are many options out there. I'm not an expert on building fabric as a whole. It's best to ask your architect for the type of options there are. There are options of triple glazing. There are options of recycled material. The key thing is to think about U value. It's the amount of energy that gets lost through the wall. The lower the U value, the better. One other key thing you should start asking, if you're very green in minded, is to think about also embodied carbon as well. That is yet not in building regulations at all, but it's something to start thinking about how you want to and what sort of energy you want to embed into your property. So once you've got your fabric down and organized with your architect, normally sort of around about 25 to 30% over and above what's required for building regulations, we can then move on to the next step. So step 2 is to define your available PV array area. I go straight in there with PVs because they are one of the best renewables out on the market, and they can reduce your carbon footprint quite substantially. They do provide one of the best sort of return on investments in terms of pounds invested on capital cost for amount of CO2 saved. They also will save you money throughout the building lifespan as well. So what are your options? I'm going to go through a few PV array options. So the first option is these ones behind me are built into the roof structure itself. They look a lot better than the sort of stereotypical ones you see nowadays that have been bolted on existing roofs. So secondly, if you're a home user, you might think about using a Tesla wall battery, and there are other options we'll go through in a minute. The advantage of the Tesla wall battery is that the energy will be generated during the day when you're not in and not using a lot of energy, and then will be stored in your battery to then be used when you come back from work. The other option is to use a slate or tile method. Tesla have got a lot of press recently about their option. We're not 100% sure when that's coming in, but currently there are other manufacturers on the market that use like solar slate or pretty much a normal tile, and then they put the PV panel on top of that, which, as you can see, is what they've installed above here. So a little bit closer look. This is the normal tile. They put the PV panel on there, and then behind that there's just an electrical connection. So the actual sort of end result looks pretty cool. The actual cost of it, I'm not sure what the difference is, but when I was here last, they said it was almost the same price as if you were paying for a normal tile with also a PV array. One thing you got to know about a normal typical Tesla setup is that it can't be used as a backup battery. So if the power goes out in your home, your battery can't be used. There are other manufacturers out in the market now that are starting to put in switchovers that allows you to have a backup supply within your home. So those are some of the options you have with PVs. And I say available area because you need to just think about trimming that area later on through the design process. It's important that you don't want too big a PV panel array because you might be investing too much money into something you don't actually use. You're only really helping yourself if you're using it, but you are helping the grid as well. You've also got to check that you've got enough as capacity in the local area to take your excess power as well. So that's important to tell or ask the local supply. Generally not a problem if you're staying sort of domestic scale or 4 kilowatts. So once you've got the PV array sorted, let's move on to your main heat source. So now you've got a much better understanding of what size PV array you can fit on your roof and what type it is going to be and how much it's going to cost. From that, you can then ask yourself what is left in your budget to further reduce your carbon footprint. Typically, this is either spent on improving your building fabric even more or replacing the main heat source with a low carbon technology.